Thanks for coming, everyone. Super excited to be here. First of all, thanks to everyone who was involved in organizing this. LimaCharlie, that was an absolutely fantastic experience so far. And all I heard from everyone was that everyone seems to have a great time. So thank you, and I hope there's going to be a second one at some point in the future. So we're going to, oh, and I have the clicker. Okay. So we're going to talk about Wi-Fi security today. And I'm going to keep, this looks like a play button, and I wonder what happened if I click this. Okay, this is the next button. We're going to keep this, because we have about 30 minutes, we're going to keep this at an absolute kind of level of overview. Because I've been spending time thinking about Wi-Fi security, working around Wi-Fi security, I guess, but working kind of in the area of Wi-Fi security in my free time since at least 2017 now, and there's still new things that you can discover. And there are people who do this full time, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. But the cool thing is, there's a few fundamentals that you can absolutely cover in 30 minutes that I think can be very helpful for everyone, even people who are not working with wireless networks 24 hours a day. So I think this is still going to be very helpful, and I think this is going to be something that you can all take home, and then maybe remember one day when you are dealing with a Wi-Fi. And it's also, honestly, it's a pretty fascinating topic. Someone asked me, why Wi-Fi? Like, why are you so fascinated with that? And I had never thought about that. And the first thing that came to my mind is I find it amazing that I can have a device here and put bytes into a socket, and then they like pop up on that side of the room somehow, and someone can read it. I find that idea just pretty fascinating. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not a radio frequency person. I couldn't explain to you why it does that or how it does that. I'm more in kind of the upper levels of the protocol stack. A little bit of an introduction. I think that Eric has already covered some of that. I'm from Germany originally. I live in Houston now. Moved there about 8 years ago, so from Germany. And like Eric said, I was the founder and CTO at Greylock before. My last day there was January 1st this year, so I'm out of there pretty fresh, I think. And in 2017, I started nzyme as an open source project. Sounds very familiar because in 2009, I started Greylock as an open source project, and then it turned into what it is today. Started nzyme because at Greylock, I was just not writing any code anymore. I think a lot of the tech founders will understand that story, that like at some point you're not allowed to really touch the code anymore, which honestly is a good idea. But I like to write code, and so I wanted to still do that, and so I was looking for another kind of small side project where I can still just hack away when I felt like it. That was nzyme, because that was the same time where I think I came back from a DEF CON or so, and I saw the Hack 5 booth, and of course, like everyone, I bought a Wi-Fi Pineapple and started to play around with it, and then got really scared about Wi-Fi networks for a while, because they seemed to be a huge issue to me, because it seemed to be really easy to kind of mess with them and maybe use them as a vector to get into somebody else's network. And because I was looking for something to do, I said, you know what, I'm just going to make this little project, because I'm sure that you can monitor this, and I'm sure that you can detect something like a Wi-Fi Pineapple. And that's how that started back in 2017. So now I do this full time. This company, the new company, nzyme, and I'm not going to talk about nzyme very much after this, I promise. This is about Wi-Fi security. It's bootstrapped, which means no VC money involved, which means right now it's literally, it's mostly me, and the first people are kind of starting to form up, I would say, to like see how we can work in the future, but it's all a little slower, but I think it's also going to be very sustainable, and the goal is to produce a really, really cool product that people actually really like. It focuses on Wi-Fi and Ethernet. I'm skipping the entire Ethernet part today. And again, I don't want to promote nzyme today. I want to talk about Wi-Fi security. If you want to follow me, I'm on Mastodon. This 0x58ed is my blog and my personal website. There's an nzyme Discord, and you can also always reach out to me via email. And there's also a mostly dead Twitter account, but you can follow me there as well, and then jump from there to other content. So now, the first really important question, who needs Wi-Fi security? Because I am not, and nzyme is not in the business of scaring people into running and maybe buying something that they actually don't need, right? I think that is something that a lot of companies in this space like to do. So I'm not here today to scare you about Wi-Fi and scare you about all the risks that might actually not apply to you at all. So to be very clear, I don't think that a ton of people need Wi-Fi security at an extremely high level. There's for a ton of people no need to deploy a whole network of sensors that monitor your radio frequency environment the whole time, because I think if you look at it, I think the risk factor of using Wi-Fi is actually if you implement some fairly simple controls, it's I think the risk is pretty low. I think that most people are extremely unlikely to become a target of a sophisticated Wi-Fi attack. This all goes back to this old burner phone discussion, right? Do I need a burner phone when I log into this Starbucks Wi-Fi at the Las Vegas airport in August? I don't know. Probably not, honestly, if you follow some very simple security precautions. But some people do need real Wi-Fi security. For some people, this is absolutely in their threat model, and we're going to look at one or two cases where people were successfully compromised with Wi-Fi as a vector. And then I think most importantly, it's also fun to learn. So there's absolutely nothing wrong, even if you don't need it. I mean, we all run stuff that we absolutely don't need, but it's fun to run, right? I think probably a few people in this room have a huge server rack somewhere at home in a closet. Like, do we need that? No, but it's a ton of fun, right? And so you can still take care of it, and I think it can be a ton of fun. And one goal of nzyme is actually to make that possible without a huge investment, without having someone monitor this 24/7, and without needing any sort of special hardware. So I think this will make it accessible actually to a lot of people. Like I said, there are some documented cases of high-level organizations and individuals being successfully attacked through Wi-Fi vectors. There is an interesting indictment from the US Department of Justice that explains and describes in detail how Russian GRU hackers infiltrated organizations and individuals through Wi-Fi vectors. And there's one sentence in that indictment that I found very interesting, which is they professionally resort to what they call close access operations, which means they're getting into physical proximity of their target to attack them in physical proximity through Wi-Fi often. They resort to close access operations whenever their classic remote hacking methods fail. They'll try to phish you first, right? And then maybe they go one step further and you're really important, they may have a 0-day, I don't know. But it is common practice to, when the target is valuable enough and the risk is deemed low enough or worth it, to actually attack people with close access operations. There were 2 documented cases in that where Russia or the GRU was attacking anti-doping officials when Russia was banned from the Olympic Games. They got very interested in that suddenly. And also they tried to attack the OPCW, which is a organization for the prevention of chemical weapons, in which they're of course also very interested after they allegedly, I guess, used chemical weapons in Syria. They got very interested in that and also involved in the poisoning of a British national in England. So this is from Dutch authorities. This is a close access team arriving at Schiphol Airport on the way to infiltrate through Wi-Fi means and close access operations the OPCW lab in Den Haag. And this might look familiar to some people. They were, the moment they parked their car that they rented with the trunk facing the OPCW lab offices, they were busted by Dutch military intelligence. So they were clearly monitoring something, or they were aware that this was about to happen. And they basically had a trunk full of batteries and literally Wi-Fi pineapples. They bought them from the Hack5 store online. So they used those. They were busted, but they did successfully infiltrate several officials from anti-doping organizations, and they even set up persistent access to certain hotel networks in Brazil, actually, of all places, where they went to a conference and stayed in the same hotel and simply got busy in the Wi-Fi environment there and were successful. So that is a case where if you are a chemical weapons lab that is investigating a poisoning on a very high international level, then yeah, you should definitely think about Wi-Fi security. This is just one documented case. So to give you some background on Wi-Fi security, there's a thing called Wi-Fi Management Frames. There's 2, well maybe 3 types broader types of Wi-Fi frames. The ones that are important for this topic are management frames. They're basically the ones that make sure that the network works. If you open your phone and you get the list of networks, that is built based on management frames. So the access points here in the ceiling, they're sending a management frame type called the beacon, which is telling your device that I am an access point, I'm serving the following network or networks, I'm using the following security settings, I'm operating on the following channels. It kind of just advertises its existence. That's one important frame type. I highlighted those that are the most relevant, I think. There's a probe request and a probe response frame type. Your phone or other mobile devices are often sending out a probe request saying, I am a station, so I'm a phone, for example, and I'm looking for a network. Is that around here? So they are basically probing for your home network, for the United Lounge, the Delta Lounge, the Marriott Wi-Fi. They're asking if this is around here. And then there's a response, which is like a beacon saying, like, yes, I'm here, you can connect to me. And then there's also the disassociation or deauthentication frame type. Those are basically if you are, let's say you're walking from this corner of the room into the lobby and you're losing signal strength and this access point knows that you're about to disconnect from it, it can send you a deauthentication frame and say, hey, you disconnect from me, start to connect to that one over there, and then your phone will do that or your device will do that. And your phone can do the same thing when you turn off Wi-Fi, for example. Now, the problem with that, though, is that these frames, management frames, are not encrypted at all. Everyone can just send those. I could, right now, from a Linux laptop, for example, you could just send these. And that, of course, means you can also spoof these. I can just take the MAC address of that access point and pretend to be that access point. And there's no way for you or your device to make a difference between that. So if you want to set up a man-in-the-middle attack, for example, yeah, if you can get someone to believe that that is your access point, which is not hard to do, your device is going to connect to it, and now you're sitting in the middle of their entire communication, right? There's a few things. We're going to go through these threats in just a second. But that's kind of the basis, I would say, of Wi-Fi security, is that these frames exist. They're very important. Ton of devices. There's probably, I want to guess, 100 devices right here, right now in this room with your iPads, your phones, your Apple Watches, everything is Wi-Fi connected, are constantly interacting with these things and they're unencrypted. You can just send them and there's no way for you to verify who sent it. That is kind of the core of Wi-Fi security. This is a great screenshot because it's just Amazon.com. So you don't need any special hardware to do that. You do need a Wi-Fi adapter. That's it's usually USB. You get those. You see, it's Amazon Prime. Like you can get them the next day. This is a good one. This one supports Wi-Fi 6. It's dual band. That's one of the better ones. That costs like $80. You can get them for $20. You can get them in this small without an external antenna. And they look like a little USB stick. That's if you want to hack on this on the plane. I would always recommend that instead of having 20 antennas sticking out of your back. That's not a great idea on a plane always. But you get those next day from Amazon. So when I say special hardware, I mean you don't need to like secure them like in a crazy way, and they're not going to cost you a lot of money. I have whatever drawer you open in my house, you're going to see like 6 of these fall out of it because I have a ton of them. Very easy to get, but you need those because you have to put them. You're going to stumble upon that real quickly. If you get involved in this topic, you need to be able to put them into what's called monitor mode, which is like a promiscuous mode of an Ethernet interface, which means it will just record everything on the air and then make that available to you through packet capture, Wireshark, all of those kind of classic ways to look at network traffic. And now I want to go through, I believe I have 5 threats. This one's the most complicated, I would say, but there's a few more. So, and this is the classic one. I think that is where when people use the Wi-Fi Pineapple, this is usually what they're after. It's the man in the middle. It's called a rogue or an evil twin access point. I'm not sure what the Wi-Fi here is called, but let's say it's the mission control Wi-Fi. It's called mission control, and you're all connected to it because there's, I don't know, maybe there's bad mobile reception or something here. You're all connected to it. What would stop me from setting up an additional access point, call it mission control, and then have you connect to it? One thing that would stop me is I might not necessarily know the passphrase of the network, so your phone's going to refuse to connect to it if it's a different passphrase. That's one thing. But if especially if it's an open network, this is very, very easy to do. Like you can literally blend into the environment, and if you can get someone to connect to yours, which your phone decides for you usually, I'm sitting in the middle of all of your communication. And in fact, none of it goes through the conference network. It all goes through my network, and I'm sitting in the middle. Device can be tricked to connect to these because there's some logic in the Wi-Fi stacks of your mobile endpoints that will always try to find the best access point, which is usually the one that has the strongest signal, right? So if you can generate a very strong signal, you don't even need to do anything. The device is most likely to switch over to yours automatically. And again, now you're sitting in the middle of it. The other thing is that this would be a rogue access point. Would be I could set up in a place that maybe doesn't have a good Wi-Fi, maybe doesn't have a free Wi-Fi, or like a weird free Wi-Fi where we have to sign in with Facebook or something weird, like these airport Wi-Fis tend to have sometimes. Just call it free Wi-Fi, free_Wi-Fi, and somebody's going to get annoyed with the actual free Wi-Fi and connect to yours. You're sitting in the middle. Nothing stops you from doing that as well. These de-authentication frames that I mentioned are often part of that kind of attack because, again, they're not encrypted. So I can act like any access point and say, your device, I'm pointing at no one specifically, your general device, please disconnect. And that's it. Like you don't even tell where to connect next. You just say, disconnect. And that's not a request, that's a command. And so the Wi-Fi stack will respond to that and will disconnect. You can also send that to a broadcast address, which means everyone disconnect. Like you can literally send that, and they're most likely going to do that. So if you send a lot of these frames the whole time, they're going to disconnect, and guess what? They might connect to yours next, because the stack detects, hey, I'm never connected to the actual access point, let's try this other one. Or because you simply have a stronger signal strength, because you're closer, or because you're an attacker, so you don't care about what the FCC says, and you just blast this out with an insane signal strength, and people are going to connect to you. There are luckily some defenses against this, and this is where nzyme does a lot of things. If you run any sort of enterprise Wi-Fi environment, you will probably know there's probably a checkbox in there that enables some sort of monitor thing. These are often very simple, and they're very, very easy to get around as well, because they often look at the MAC addresses. They know their inventory, right? They know I have 25 access points with these addresses. If there's anything else popping up, alert me, because that means there's a rogue access point, right? Problem is, I just spoofed that MAC address as well. Boom, so you get around that. So there's some of these like old school kind of ways to do that. nzyme does more than that. It does that too if you want to, but it does more than that. It is also fingerprinting BSSIDs, or that's the access point addresses. It's fingerprinting them, which works really reliably, which surprised me, where often the drivers and the hardware are setting certain parameters of the Wi-Fi frames that are sent out that user space very often can't really influence, and those are fingerprintable, and they're pretty reliable. And that means if there's a rogue access point popping up, and that one is perfectly spoofing all the parameters, like the MAC addresses, the channels it's working on, the name, the encryption parameters, all of that, the fingerprint will most likely still be different because it's not the same firmware with the same chipset and the same software sending out the data. You can still work around that, but that is already a pretty tough barrier for a lot of people to work around. So nzyme is constantly comparing these fingerprints and then tells you there's currently 2 different fingerprints for the same access point. That should never be the case. And then it's also monitoring physical signal characteristics. Because if you think about it, what's the hardest to spoof is the actual signal that comes in, right? So let's say there's 3 legitimate access points here, and someone is trying to spoof them from the lobby with an antenna in their backpack, right? That's a very different signal characteristic when it comes in compared to the actual ones. So nzyme is recording these signal characteristics and said, that's the one that I expect. The moment they change, it will alert you on that as well. So it goes like 1 level deeper, and that gets really, really hard to spoof. Okay, so that's a very reliable, it draws these signal tracks, which we're going to have a screenshot from in just a second. And then you can do other things, and then you can locate all of that if you run multiple sensors, or taps as we call them in nzyme. If you have at least 3, you can of course try to triangulate them, with some caveats about how reliable that is, because there might be a wall in between, it changes the signal strength, but you're going to get a general idea of where someone might be. That's not implemented yet before you start looking for that, but that's coming in future versions. We're currently in alphas. That's just not in there. So if you look at that, that is what nzyme looks like for a monitored network. So you just tell it what you expect, and then it constantly compares that about what it sees, or against what it sees, and then it will alert you if there's anything going on that shouldn't be. I don't know if I mentioned that nzyme is open source. I tend to just go over that, but you can go and download it right now also if you want to do that. And that is the signal strength characteristic. So that is something that will be in the nzyme web interface. So you see that it has detected two what we call signal tracks. The one on the right is the actual legitimate access point, and the one on the left is someone spoofing that access point. And an access point can never be in two locations at the same time, so it will alert you on that. It will say, I get two different signals from the same access point. That is basically impossible. See, even if they're pretty close, the x-axis here is the signal strength. It will still detect that. That is something that is really, 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 really hard to work around. The second one, and these are going to be easier, eavesdropping. If you're sitting in the middle, you can, of course, record all the traffic. But even if you're not sitting in the middle, if it's an open network, for example, it means that there's no encryption between you and the access point, which means that if you're in the same network, you can just read all of that, right? That's the classic. Some people are bored and they're in a hotel network and they just try to see what's going on in that. You'll see a lot of the traffic of the people in the other rooms as well. However, the other one is you can, of course, break into a network and then join it. But everything, I believe, starting with WPA encryption actually has a unique also encryption between you and the access point or the rest of the network. So even if you're in the same network and you have the passphrase, doesn't mean that you can read other people's traffic in it. But there are ways. There's a few exploits out there that you can use if you really want to. But the defenses for that are pretty simple in the end. You just have to encrypt all traffic on the application layer. So use TLS wherever you can. Maybe use a VPN if you have one that you trust. That's actually the point where I would recommend actually using a VPN is in a public Wi-Fi. But again, how likely is it that someone tries to, actually in the same network, actually tries to read your traffic, right? If it's easy, if it's just flip in a box, sure, turn it on. But you should be aware that in a open Wi-Fi, that is usually possible. And then, patch your Wi-Fi hardware to not become a victim of a exploit that's out there. And then upgrade to newer and improved Wi-Fi security protocols like WPA3. The problem is all your endpoints have to support it. So if you got anything embedded, for example, there's a chance they just don't support WPA3, right? That's the reason why some of these new security measures are simply not implemented. And then also, I think pretty simple, if someone gets into your network, you need to properly segment the underlying network behind your Wi-Fi. Then someone gets into your network, right? That's also a risk, I would say. So if you have a flat network and every Wi-Fi client is just in the network just as every other client, if someone gets in there, they're in your network, right? That's just something to also keep in mind. But I think most people have at least segmented their Wi-Fi out and or their public Wi-Fi for sure, heavily VLAN, for example. And then I think this is my favorite, captive portals. That is, a captive portal is what pops up when you connect to a free Wi-Fi and immediately a browser comes up and it offers you to, I don't know, you have to maybe accept terms and conditions, maybe you have to sign into something, right, to actually get your internet access now. That's a captive portal. The problem is with that, that's of course just a website that pops up on the user's phone, for example, right? And so people have started to abuse that. There is a tool called Wi-Fi Fisher, which every time I look at it, I get a little more scared of it because it gets better and better. I think they're sponsored by Tynes, actually, who I think we have some people here. So thank you for this use case. Wi-Fi Fisher is really interesting. What they do, and I kind of love it and I hate it so much. They give you, this is like templates they give you. That's from their GitHub. That just comes with it. You turn that on, it spins up an access point that you call whatever you want. Call it free airport Wi-Fi, right? Free conference Wi-Fi. Call it mission control Wi-Fi. Someone might connect to that. This page pops up on their endpoint automatically, and it says, oh yeah, it's free, but you got to log in with Facebook real quick. That's not Facebook though. That's just you were getting a post request with the user's password and the username. And that's, I mean, my parents would do that. I might do that, you know, like that's something, if you don't think about it, if you're used to it, you might do that. And yeah, guess what? They just let you in. They say like, yeah, it's successful. There's like, because they don't want to get into Facebook directly, right? They just want your password. They maybe, if you reuse their password, they don't even care if it's your Facebook password, right? So you can collect some very interesting data that way, and you just always respond with a 200 OK and let them in, you know, they won't even notice anything. The other one, and that one is kind of wild also. Imagine you spin up a network, you want to get into a corporate network, right? And it's called, again, Mission Control Private, which is for the LimaCharlie crew. I'm making this up, this is not actually that. And you want to get into that network, so you need the password for that network. You can spin up a network and call it Mission Control Free. Connect to that, deauth all the LimaCharlie people whose MAC addresses you might have collected before, deauth all their phones, but they really need to get online right now to do something, right? So they're going to be like, okay, screw it, I'm going to use the free Wi-Fi real quick, which is yours. You render an error page that you render. That's not actually the browser's error page. You look at the user agent, render a realistic error page. And then this here, that's also just HTML. So it's just HTML that renders a box for the login and looks like, oh, we couldn't connect, and looks like it tries to connect back to the actual network, asks for the passkey, which now you as an attacker receive, which is another really interesting way that I honestly had not thought about before. And that's what Wi-Fi Fisher does, which is about to be fingerprinted, luckily, in nzyme. So if you spin up a Wi-Fi Fisher, it will immediately. And then the last one is jamming. You just send broadcast deauthentication frames as fast as you can, all the time, and basically your Wi-Fi will start to break down. So that's something I added kind of on for the defense side here, that you should, if you do anything like this, you should consider what you actually do about that. Because some people get stuck. They get alerted, and they know that the Wi-Fi is down, and maybe nzyme tells them, yeah, there's like a broadcast jamming attack going on right now. One thing that you should consider in kind of your response scenarios, maybe your tabletops for any of these attacks is, now what? Right? Now what do I do? Because how are you, if that's just someone with a big battery and a bunch of antennas in the backpack, like how are you now going to stop them? Right? So there's also a physical security part to this. So you need to locate and then have a plan of how you stop it. Because that's just some person. Like, what are you going to do? That's the funny thing. This is close access, right? This is someone who's here. How do we respond to that? That by definition means someone is here right now. That's an interesting topic. I learned Illustrator and had like a bottle of wine, and I thought, you know what? It's dangerous that you can get Illustrator for like $20 a month now and then cancel it after you created that. We're going to make stickers out of it. So I call this, because I don't like the term Wi-Fi security, because it's kind of, I don't know. I don't like what's out there for Wi-Fi security, and I know it describes it, but I never really liked the name. So again, there was a bottle of wine involved, and I called it closed access denial. So the opposite of closed access operations, right? Denying closed access operations. Wrote a blog post about that. It's on my website, WX5. This is such a stupid domain name. I was in the emergency room, they needed my email address for some reason, and I was in pain. I had to explain to them that that is not gmail.com, but my own stupid domains. Don't do that either. But yeah, if you want to learn more about that, this is kicking off this series about that, because like I said, there's interesting topics around physical security. What do you do? How do you locate? What does all this do? And I think we're right on time. Like I said, super short introduction. Really maybe want to kind of pique your interest in that. Tons of resources. Like I said, follow me online. I tend to think about that a lot. I do. Adriano's here in the audience. He also is pretty deeply involved in that. We're going to be around all day, and I'm sure we're going to see you at other conferences. So that's my introduction. I don't know if we have time for questions or not. I'm not sure. But like I said, I'm also going to be around. I think Eric is coming up.
I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious. A lot of thank you. A lot of the attacks and anomalies that you discussed involve baselining around known Wi-Fi footprint, which works great if you're running like an office like this and you're able to really kind of harden it from that perspective.
Yeah.
Is there similarly a lot of anomalies that you can detect without any baselining at all, right? Like the scenario, which is also pretty relevant to close access of, I'm going into a hotel in some random city in some random country, and I have no idea what's around.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of just curious of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because of course now if individuals are targeted, right, and they are somewhere in a hotel network, how do you protect those? Like if you are protecting the mobile assets of a person, how do you do that without baselining every hotel in the world, right? That is a fantastic question. So there are some. So the signal tracks, for example, they will work within a few minutes because they're not. Oh, there's another button. Interesting. These will basically start to draw these boxes within minutes because it doesn't matter what the baseline is. What matters is there can never be two signals from two different locations in the same moment. That will work right away. Okay. The other thing that will work right away is the fingerprinting. Considering that the GRU is using Wi-Fi pineapples, and we fingerprinted all of those with all different firmware combinations and settings, the moment you turn that thing on, nzyme's going to alert you on that. And so you can fingerprint those. Some other things is, yeah, I would not recommend setting up every time you are somewhere. Please don't go and set up a list of all known good BSS IDs and their settings and the channels they operate on. That's probably overkill, but I've been thinking about, is there a mobile version of this that only does a little bit, that maybe runs as a service in the background somewhere, you know? Interesting question. But yeah, there's some things you can do that will work almost immediately. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
How do you handle, if you have like multiple floors, finding the access point?
Yeah. So for Nzyme, you can run multiple what we call taps. They're either recording Ethernet traffic through a mirror port, or you connect these Wi-Fi adapters to it. You can run as many of those as you want. What's interesting, where I don't have a great answer yet, and I think it's going to become a user interface question. So to answer that in short, you deploy enough taps which run on a Raspberry Pi in like 10% CPU usage, Raspberry Pi 3 with like 80 megabytes of RAM. Adriano ran that on like these little travel routers because he cross-compiled it to MIPS, so did something crazy nerdy. So you can deploy a lot of those very cheaply. For the triangulation part, I think that's going to become an interesting question because you're going to have overlaps from different floors, right? So you've got to think 3D. That's going to be a user interface question, I think. But in short, you deploy enough taps to cover what you need to cover, basically. And they report up HTTPS, so you can run the bigger Nzyme server that does the analysis, the alerting. That can run in the cloud somewhere if you want, or wherever, because it just reports up HTTPS. Basically, that's the simple architecture of it. Yep.
Okay. One other question. Does the open source version do WPA3 now?
Yes.
Okay. And are WPA3 management frames also unencrypted?
So I never know where exactly they introduced that, but there is a concept called protected management frames, PMF. Those can be protected. WPA3 does not mean that they're protected. That's a common misunderstanding. It does not mean that those management frames are suddenly protected. You have to enable protected management frames. In reality, most people don't do that because of compatibility issues. Because you're going to have devices that simply don't support that, and then they're locked out. And so I have not yet seen one network that does that. But that's something to look into. The DEF CON network does, I just heard.